Welcome to the Reduced Cyber Risk Podcast, episode 71, Understanding Multi-Factor Authentication to Pass the CISSP. Welcome to the Reduced Cyber Risk Podcast, where we provide you the training and tools you need to pass the CISSP exam while enhancing your cybersecurity career. Hi, my name is Sean Gerber, and I'm your host for this action-packed, informative podcast. Join me each week as I provide the information you need to grow your cybersecurity knowledge so that you're better prepared to pass the CISSP exam. All right, let's get going. Hey, good morning, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well this beautiful day. It's a great day here in the United States, and I can't complain whatsoever. The weather's starting to warm up, so that's always a positive. I'm starting to sound like an old man. I talk about the weather a lot, but unfortunately, there's when you have to deal with children and you deal with your life, that kind of seems where it goes back to. But yeah, it's interesting. Oh, by the way, that had an interesting day this past week, and we bought a new car for my children. So yes, it's very interesting. I've got so many of them at home that what ends up happening is I got various levels of cars in various states of disrepair, from they leak fluids all over the driveway to they're actually drivable. So it's a very fun time this time in my life. It's quite interesting. So I had one that asked me, and they looked at it, we sat in the car, and my son Jax goes, "I like this car." I said, "Really?" I said, "Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's a little Toyota Scion or something like that, and it's got a lot, like 200,000 miles on it, and I didn't pay a whole lot for it, but he likes the car, so that's always a positive." But then I've got the other children all looking at it going, "Well, why didn't I not get one? Why didn't I not have this? Why didn't I get that?" And it's interesting. So if any of you out there that are studying for your CISSP have children, you can relate. If you don't have children, bless you. You're probably very, very fortunate right now. So you know what? It's great. Not again. Kids are great, they are, but at different times in your life, they're not so much so. So hope everybody's doing well, and you probably don't want to hear about my daily activities with my children, so we're going to move on to the next topic. So today we are going to talk about multi-factor authentication and what you need to know to pass for the CISSP exam. And it's pretty important that you understand multi-factor, and it's also important that as you deal with cybersecurity within your organization and your career, you're going to deal with multi-factor in multi phases of your life and in various places in your life. And what I also kind of get into is that multi-factor authentication and then the topic of single sign-on, they get used very ubiquitously. Okay, $10, that's probably a $15 word right there. So I would listen to a podcast, or actually books on tape, and they use big words. You have these English guys, or maybe Australian. No, they're more English, because you hear a lot of people out there that are really good on books on tape. They're English. So if you're an English person that's in England and you are listening to this podcast, which I have quite a few that do, you should get your career in reading books on tape, because you could do well. Or voiceovers, because those guys are always cool. They got the cool voice, except for this Midwestern voice is not so cool. So digressing, sorry. But when it comes down to it is that you are dealing with various aspects of multi-factor, and people will use them simultaneously. They'll use multi-factor and they'll use single sign-on, and they'll kind of interchange them, but they're really not interchangeable at all. In many cases, those are used in conjunction with each other. So multi-factor authentication, and we're going to, this first part of the podcast is going to go from a gentleman out of HID Global, and they obviously, he was trying to sell something. He's, I think, a CISO or a CISSP with them. As Jeff Carpenter is the director of cloud authentication at HID Global, and so this is an article that he had put out a little while back, but it talks about how the differences between multi-factor and SSO are important, and we're going to talk about that as we get into today's lesson and conversation, is because you will hear people talk about SSO. And For me, I'll be honest, I even had done it at one point in time, was kind of using them simultaneously, but they're not, and they're very different. So what the big thing that they talk about is, he brings up in this part here, is that simple user IDs and passwords they're no longer good enough for the most vulnerable information. And I honestly would probably challenge a little bit of that and say they're not good for much of anything. They were designed back when the first computers first came out to limit some level of access control, and we've mentioned that on the podcast numerous times, that usernames and passwords are just really a bad idea. There's a really good podcast out there I recommend going to listen to if you are a cybersecurity person that is studying for your CISSP, that needs to understand the vernacular. That's Security Now with Steve Gibson. Really, really good podcast. Super, super nice guy, and it provides that great cybersecurity fundamentals, security fundamentals, and actually more than fundamentals. He gets deep dive into stuff that is just pretty amazing. I like listening to it when I get a chance, so I'd highly recommend you go check that out. But he talks a lot about passwords and how really they are just useless, and we really need to look at ways to move beyond the simple user ID and the password. Now, he also talked about, Jeff did, this digital security must evolve, and it really has to, and that's where multi-factor is coming into play. And many countries are requiring some level of multi-factor into their environment. Now, they're not requiring single sign-on. Single sign-on, which we'll get into, is more of a convenience for people, and it doesn't add for management. It's a convenience for the individual, and it's a convenience for management or whoever's managing those systems. However, multi-factor is becoming more of a requirement by governments because of the need to help protect data. And it's really it's an important use case where people are needing it because their accounts are getting compromised at a breakneck speed. It's just happening a lot. So if you're asking, what is multi-factor authentication? Now, multi-factor, it uses multiple factors to verify the person's identity and then allow the access to these systems of software, systems, data, whatever you want to call it. But it is using different factors about you. It's what you know, what you have, who you are, and what you do and where you're at. And you're probably listening this on your drive to work or whatever. You're going, what are you saying? Well, we'll break this down just a little bit. What you know is typically the password, right? So you remember XYZ, QWERT 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8, which is a really bad password. Don't use that, but that people have used it. And I think the craziest password is like monkey, and then there's usually, it gets down into areas that are more not designed for a PG audience. People will write things that are more in the mature audience, but those things are the key passwords that people will use. It's also like your personal identification number, recovery questions, which are terrible, by the way. Recovery questions are easily guessed. So that's what you know. And typically in the past, in today, everybody uses usernames and password, what you know. Now what you have is the next topic, and that's where it can be a smart card, a FIDO token, a one-time password, Bluetooth devices, Apple Watches, so on and so forth. Now there's some really cool things happening I know Google put something out now that you have to have, more or less, you cannot have to have. You can put in place use your phone as that second factor of what you have, and it utilizes Bluetooth that connects to your computer, which acts as a multi-factor token. So someone can't just log into your device. You have to have your smartphone with you that would then Bluetooth to a device, which would act as that second token, which is a really cool idea, and I think it's what people need to utilize, those kind of aspects more. Now, as a cybersecurity person, you're going to realize real quick that the people you talk to, they just don't get it. They don't understand cybersecurity in many cases, and because of that, what ends up happening is they just lock up and they default back to what they're used to doing, and which would be the username and passwords. So you're going to have to know these things so that you can better articulate what you're going through. I'll use this as another example. I was talking to a friend of mine here locally that was picked up he started in the infrastructure space, and then as he built more influence with the company, he now is more into security. And what he's learning is that he has all these great ideas about security, which are super good. They're awesome, but you got to be very careful how fast you roll that out to people, because most people don't understand technology like you all do that are listening to this podcast. So that's where it comes into, is you have to start people off slow with you're trying to influence people in security. And therefore, one of those things, I say all of that because if you're going to utilize what Google's putting out with the Bluetooth devices for your multi-factor authentication, you need to build them into that slowly. And I think it's a great idea, and I think you should try to do that. However, you just need to crawl them into that state, because if you try to push them too fast into technology, unless you're in a technology company, and most people will lock up, they will not allow it, and it'll actually hurt your influence with the company. So smaller, even though you need to put these things in place immediately because you feel like the risk is there, you want to continue your ability to influence people, so you sometimes have to start off a little slower and then ramp up. Sorry to digress on that one, but it's important. For a security person, you really need to understand that. Second thing is who you are. Biometric authentication, such as your fingerprint or face recognition. And we'll get into bio here in a little bit of some challenges with that. It's really good. It helps out a lot. And now that you have a fingerprint scanner that's on your smartphone, that makes it much easier, along with face recognition. It's pretty cool. But bottom line is that that's what you are. So what you know, what you have, and who you are. And then the other one is what you do and where you're at. Now this is based on GPS, IP addresses, which IP addresses are really a poor idea because depending upon the network you're in, most of those IP addresses will change, and therefore it adds a level of complexity. The LastPass is a good example of that. It will base it off of location, and if you log in with your computer from a different location, or even sometimes just even the same location, the proxy will pick up that, hey, I'm now in Dallas, and it'll say that you haven't logged in from Dallas before. Well, that's really not the case. So then it ends up adding more churn to the conversation. However, it's good because if you're dealing with your usernames and passwords, you want to make sure that that's best protected. So what are the advantages of a multi-factor? It can be quite secure. I mean, it adds another level of security where your password would not. And if your password got stolen and someone started using it and they tried to log in and it asked for multi-factor, well, you would get the notification knowing full well that you have that token, so they can't get in. It uses a combination of a password, a physical token, and biometrics to reduce the risk of data breaches. And they do, and they are. That's why people recommend them. That's why companies and countries recommend them. They are a really good factor to have, good thing to have. However, it can be hacked, and I kind of talk about this a little bit, where now people have gotten so accustomed to mashing the button, mashing that what do you call it, the fingerprint scanner. So like all of a sudden you go, well, hey, I got to log into Office 365. Well, now I got to mash the button. I know that I have to mash the button, and then I get in. So it's Pavlov's dogs, where the little bell rings and everybody starts to salivate. That's the same thing that happens, right? You end up logging into Office 365 or some other application. You then get a notification on your phone that says you must mash your finger on your smartphone, which you do, and then you are in. Well, the bad guys know that, so what they're doing is they're acting like, let's just say, for example, the Office 365 login. They will send you a phishing email. You'll click on the link. It redirects you to a pseudo Office 365 login, which you think, oh, cool, I'm here, I'm at the Office 365, and you go log in, and you start putting your creds in. Well, they are stealing your creds. So your username and password, they're stealing that. And then what they're doing is they're acting as a man in the middle. They then take your creds. They then put them into the real Office 365 connection, which then in turn, the multi-factor kicks in, and you're expecting this because you're expecting, well, I put my creds into Office 365. Now I get the little multi-factor thing comes up. Oh, yep, there it is. I mash my finger on it, and now I'm in. But the problem is you're not in. The hacker is now in. So those are things that keep in mind, that not everything is perfect. People are getting accustomed to this. Now there's a delay, and some people will say, well, there's enough of a delay the user should pick it up. If you're studying for CISSP, you've been in cybersecurity, or you're wanting to be in cybersecurity, you know this. People don't care. People just want to get into their systems. They are not picking up on those little subtle nuances. They're not. And so you just have to make sure that you communicate with them what are some of the risks that they're dealing with. So I hope that makes sense in that regard, because it's really an interesting attack. I think it's great. You have the mouse and the cheese, right? Or the cat and the mouse. And so the mouse and the cheese, it's not right. You have the cat and the mouse, right? So if you're the cat or you're the mouse, the cat's always trying to get you. Well, they're always coming up with new ideas. So this cat and mouse game that we play. Now, the downside of multi-factor is it can be cumbersome. It adds technical debt. It can be very difficult to manage on the individuals. Again, you have to have a device for second factor. If it breaks, if your multi-factor system breaks, now people can't get in. That causes challenges. Now, there's applications such as Google Authenticator, QR code scanning. All of those things add additional complexity. If you're dealing with a population that does not understand these technical QR code-ish things and Google Authenticator things, people then start to just basically they don't want to do it because they don't understand it. So as technology is changing so quickly for people, I mean, I can't even keep up with it. I can only imagine how frustrating and overwhelming it is for most people, because it is overwhelming for me, and I've been doing this for 20 plus years. One-time passwords over text. Okay, so one of the disadvantages, people like those. They're not the most secure in the world. Actually, they're not, but people like them because they come right to their SMS, their texting. So that's interesting. It does get, like I mentioned before, it gets people accustomed to mashing the quote-unquote, air quotes, easy button, or just a little button that makes them happy. So you mash the button. Oh, I'm in. I'm happy. So there is some downside to that. Now, that is multi-factor, and this comes down from what Jeff said. So some of the stuff I didn't say all this stuff is what Jeff had put in there. This is a lot of my commentary as well, but that's what he had. So then he comes into and says, what is single sign-on? Now, single sign-on is very straightforward, and the ultimate goal of it is to reduce the amount of times you got to put in your username and password. Why is this the case? Well, one, it's easier for the user, right? It makes it a whole lot easier to just enter it in once and you're always in. Two, it helps foster the conversation with the user that maybe, just maybe, may use very complex usernames and passwords. It also gets them away from having multiple username and passwords that are all identical. Because what ends up happening is people they'll just have them all the same. And so now the hacker gets one, he gets them all. So the SSO solution is a much more secure solution for storing the various credentials that you may have with the various pieces of applications or software that you're using within a network. So again, it takes the creds and it logs in for you, and it remembers all these passwords at one time. Now, there's only not all these passwords. There's really only one password, and that's your main password to log in. There's significantly less effort included. Now, you can incorporate SSO with multi-factor so that when you do your first login attempt, it uses your username and password, and then it asks for a multi-factor PIN. You then enter that PIN in, and now you're in the game. You've now made it inside that application. And it's very quick and convenient for the user. So it's highly recommended that you do utilize SSO, especially if you can use it with a multi-factor solution. Now, there are risks involved with some of this, and basically credentials of third-party applications could be stored internally rather than for external systems, which is not really a risk. It's a positive for us, and it does reduce the risk for you. The other thing I've noticed is I deal with more and more third parties, and we have access to these third parties. If you can integrate with SSO with these third parties, it makes it a much more seamless environment. And as these third-party contractors are becoming more and more part of our networks, having an SSO solution integrated into your network is even more valuable. So if you're a small company, it's probably going to be a challenge to integrate all of this, but they are making it much easier for people. So just consider that when you're trying to understand SSO and how it would work within your company specifically. It also would reduce the service desk and password reset requests that you're going to get. And it also reduces the ability that people hopefully will use less username and passwords. If you're smart and you can then help your population understand this, you can give them the tools such as LastPass and allow them to make these crazy hard passwords and then store them in a LastPass environment. This kind of goes along the lines of you want to really teach your employees how to store their passwords and how to make hard, complex, long passwords. Because again, if you don't teach them, they're just going to do they're going to fall back to what they know. Now, the disadvantages of single sign-on, if a hacker or malicious actor does get access to SSO, boom, game over. That's all she wrote. So that's why you need to put enough protections in place to avoid that. It must be deployed with strong encryption and authentication. So now the thing to consider with that is if you get into countries that have encryption requirements, or you can't get encryption into these countries due to encryption regulations deployment regulations or like import-export regulations that can cause challenges. So you need to keep that in the back of your mind. The loss of the SSO system could basically, you could do a denial of service to yourself, where if the DOS goes down, or the SSO goes down, you now lose access to your entire environment. So that's a bad thing. We don't want that, because then people are screaming at you because it's all your fault. And it's like this crazy woman going, "It's all your fault." Yeah, I heard that once in a while especially when I was dating. You ever get that? You're a beautiful young woman, you're dating her, she's awesome, and you're like, "Oh, this could be cool," and then all of a sudden her head starts spinning around on top of her shoulders, and she just sits there and it's all your fault. Yeah, that's not so good. Now, the females that are probably listening to me are probably all just turning off my podcast and saying, "What? You're terrible." Well, guess what? I know a lot of ladies that had the same thing with guys of going, they're just really, really strange. So we as humans, we are just unique. There is no question about it. We are very strange. Okay. So again, the best of both worlds would be multi-factor and SSO. You guys are all probably going, "This guy just bounces all over the place." Yeah, sorry, ADD kicking in. No, so multi-factor and SSO are both coming. They're basically taking care of the issues, and they help mitigate a huge risk when you're dealing with your users logging into your environment. SSO is convenient, it is, but there are some security risks with it, and multi-factor authentication is more secure, but it's not the most convenient thing in the world. So those are the best approaches out there. So there's some things you need to consider when doing that. So when he also said he had some approaches that he had put in here, Jeff did, of it's requiring secure MFA at sign-on at the start of the day, and then it's basically allowing this SSO to continue for the rest of the day. I'd highly recommend that, but I'd also when you set up your multi-factor, I would have them do it at least once a day if you can. Again, you may get pushback from leadership of saying, we don't want that. You're just going to have to work through that, what's best for you and your company. Granting continued access to authenticated users throughout their workday. That would be awesome. However, people may kind of complain a bit on that one just because it's just constantly making them grab their phone. Again, you're going to have to work through and see if that is a viable solution or not. Requiring additional verification such as MFA does help reduce, or helps in many ways as far as accessing most sensitive data. So if you have the super secret skunkworks area within your business that people have to get access to, you may want to just require multi-factor every time they log in or every 15-20 minutes. Just kind of depends. It depends on how much of a risk you see there. If you're worried about a foreign company or country stealing your how to make a fuzzy cat fuzzier, then that would be probably something you want to worry about. However, I don't see a lot of demand for how to make a fuzzy cat fuzzier, so you may go, "You know what, that's just overkill." Something you got to consider. And again, as a security person, always keep in mind risk. You got to focus on risk, and you can't always just try to make it like Fort Knox and tighten it all the way down. That's a bad idea. Using criteria such as location, role, seniority, and those things to help with authentication. I would not use seniority just because anybody can be hacked, and it's not necessarily just the individual, it's their account. And just because a person's been with you a long time does not make them a less of a risk for your company. So you got two different aspects going on here. You've got your network credentials getting compromised, and you have the human being compromised. The older they've been with the longer they've been with a company, honestly, in many cases that could also tend to make them more of a risk, just because, especially if they're a little more seasoned like myself, and the company's saying, "Yeah, we're probably going to let you go here, or we're probably looking at downsizing," they tend to start shipping all of their data out the door. So I don't say as a group, they don't tend to all do that, but that tends to be a bit of an indicator, as you would say. Overall, the convenience of SSO combined with the security of MFA gives businesses a security posture and confidence, and they do. I like MFA. It's very, very cool. So the author is Jeff Carpenter. He's a director of cloud authentication at HID Global, and he's 15 years in cybersecurity. So he's good. He's worked with Crossmatch and RSA and Dell. Big names that are out there. So the dude has a good understanding of what he needs. And he's a CISSP and a CCSP, Cloud Security Professional, Certified Cloud Security Professional. So he knows his stuff, and it's a good little article. But you can catch that out at hidglobal.com in multi-factor authentication. So if you search for that, you can see more with Jeff. All right, so that's all I have for that piece of it. We're going to roll into the CISSP training that you need to know for your exam, and this would be Objective 5-2, Identity Management, Implementation, and Single Multi-Factor Authentication. That is a mouthful. All right, let's get going. All right, so before we get started, I got to put a plug and shout out. Go to SeanGerber.com. You can check out all my CISSP training that's there, as well as a plethora, cornucopia, and a large volume of training that's available for you to study for your CISSP exam. So I've got example questions out there. We've got the CISSP mini course that's available to you, and I also have my entire CISSP training course that is available for you, and that is an awesome price. You can go online, you can find it anywhere. You will not find it any cheaper than that. I mean, it really, because seriously, if anybody gets any cheaper than that, they're basically giving it away. But you can check it out at SeanGerber.com, and with that, you get all my content, plus you get access to me, and we can chitty chat through some emails and back and forth a little bit if you have any questions. So again, go to SeanGerber.com. It's SHON. Yes, my parents are awesome. Gerber, like the baby food.com. All right, and let's roll into our CISSP training. Okay, so identity management implementation. We talked about how when you're setting up your identity management, and we talked about multi-factor and SSO in the previous aspects, but it falls into two categories. There's a centralized version and there's a decentralized version when you're talking about identity management. Your centralized version is its verification with basically one entity. So you have, at your company, you have a centralized identity and access management, and that's verified with them. You have a decentralized, which basically means it's verified and it's perform authorization. So one aspect would be is you are dealing with, let's say, Google, or you're dealing with Facebook. Your identity could be decentralized because it could be in various locations, and they're using a single sign-on capability to get you added your credentials in one time, and now you have access. So those are the two different types, centralized and decentralized. Your single sign-on is, again, it's used more and more. We're seeing more of that, as we mentioned in the previous part of the podcast. You authenticate once, and the resources do become available to you, and then it does avoid multiple passwords. So as you're taking the CISSP, those are some key terms to understand. Is it's using one-time login, it avoids multiple passwords, and it's very valuable for convenience for employees. So keep that in mind. Now the downside is, again, if the account's compromised, they do have greater access into your environment. So those are considerations around single sign-on. Now, as we're dealing with Ldap, Ldap was a key point of that around identity management and implementation. This is a directory-based service, and they use as a central database. And Ldap stands for Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. This is a directory where basically all your network services and assets are located in, and there's certificates that are built into Ldap. Now, as you're logging in, your single sign-on will integrate into Ldap, and that's what controls your access. And that's how it supports single sign-on. So as all these things interact together, then what ends up happening is these things basically keeps the credentials that allows you to log into your environment. And so that's where you get into the centralized control with single sign-on. So it's an important aspect to kind of overall to understand how identity management works within most environments. Now, there's a single multi-factor authentication. We talked about single versus multi-factor, and your single uses is using one factor, and your multi-factor is using more than two factors, right? Two or more. And so those are the key things around smart cards, passwords, fingerprint scanners. Those are all important pieces that will add multi-factor. I remember the day when I was working on the red team, and we had some individuals were asking around this. This is just when it started kind of coming out. One thing in the military we used in the past was a smart card, and the smart card was a chip, or it's basically a card that has a computer chip that's placed on it, and you utilize that as your token to log in. And typically you had to enter in a PIN code, and that would verify you knew that piece of it, and it would then sign a certificate that would allow for email. And so there's various forms you can integrate that within your company. You could utilize that capability as well. We used to copy the smart cards, and you could always copy what they looked like, but you could never copy the data. Now they probably can now. You can probably just transfer the data off of a smart card. I would be willing to bet you can, and put it onto another smart card. It'd be very simple, I would think, and the equipment's highly, it's probably out there in the market. You could probably purchase it very quickly. So, but the thing is what was cool is we would use a smart card as people would see, well, hey, you have a smart card, so you're allowed into the network. And when they would do that you're allowed into the building. So we just flash a smart card in front of somebody and go, "Oh, you belong here." And I'm like, "Yes, I do." And then we would just walk in. So yeah, it's again, you got to build your security policy around the fact that it's more than just, hey, you see somebody that has the credentials hanging around their neck. That doesn't mean that they belong there. So we did it in so many funny ways on that. We actually we copied the smart card, which was easy. Then we also used a piece of paper and made a photocopy of it, put it into a little what do you call it? Little bend, those little things that hang around your neck, and we pasted it over the top of a debit card. No, actually, not that one. It wasn't a debit card. It was over our key card for our hotel, and people just, "Oh yeah, cool, come on in. Hey, come on in." So it was funny. Anyway, digressing. All right, device authentication. It's a mobile. Basically, you don't have to be part of the domain, such as like in the case of Ping ID. You can install an application on there on your mobile device, and it'll allow you to log in through multi-factor. You type that in, you're good to go. We deal with that in various places around the world, and I will have third parties that will come in, and we will push out to them a Ping ID, and then they can utilize that as their multi-factor. Because again, it authenticates back to Ping ID. Then it also is tied into our network environment. So when someone logs in with their multi-factor authentication, it allows them access in. Biometrics, these are probably the most capable fingerprints with mobile devices. I say that, however, my daughter can look at my wife's phone and unlock it. It's kind of scary. So, it's interesting to see how it's not infallible. It still will work. So it's not a perfect solution. It's one more barrier to reducing people from getting access into your network. It does store of personal data. Compliance and legal could be involved. Well, they should be involved as you're dealing with multi-factor, and if any, or even SSO if they're storing any sort of credentials. You need to make sure that they are connected to it. And it isn't such a big deal if it's here in the States. I mean, it still is, but if you're getting into other countries such as the EU, there is some conversations that need to occur about that. Service authentication. This is highly targeted by attackers. And why is it? Because what ends up happening is if they can get access to this, then they can get access to your entire environment, and they can get 24/7 access, which is what I used to do. We would target people's authentication. Once we got their creds, now we could act as them 24/7, okay, 365. And that's what they want to do. Because again, all hackers are lazy, just like everybody else. And what they want to do is they want to get access into environments, and they're usually, maybe if they're around the country, so let's say Ukraine or any place other than the United States, and they're attacking somebody within the United States, they're working usually through the evening to go after people that are in the United States working during the day. So once they get 24/7 access, they can go back to their normal hours, just like everybody else. And that's what they want to do, because why would you not want to work on normal hours like everybody else? So it's kind of important. Passwords, they don't change much. Obviously, they never change in many cases. And people, or if they do, they just iterations of the original password. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. Security processes, certificate-based authentication, complex passwords, and they all are integrated with password vaults. And you need to consider password vaults for your people and give them the tools so that they can best protect their passwords. Now, when you're dealing with accountability with multi-factor and SSO and all these other aspects, you need to have trusted individuals, obviously, in systems and processes within your network. Now, the people need to be trusted, because if you can't run a business without trusting your people, people will let you down. That's going to happen. But you want to avoid all access authorization. So, hey, Bill has got access to all of the credentials. He's a quote-unquote air god that has access to our network. So he's the awesome dude. Well, bad idea for having Bob have access to everything. Now, unfortunately, you may have to do it, but if you do, make sure that you watch Bob, because Bob could go rogue, or his account could go rogue on you at any point in time. You need to have it granted so the permissions are only for the role, and they should be very granular. Now, the downside of this is the more granular you make them, that does add some complexity that you have to work through. Individual systems, they all need to be accountable for their actions, and it's important that you create, and auditing these people does help to ensure accountability and responsibility. I like to audit them. I also like to let them know that I'm watching. There's probably the movie out of, what was that? Bug's Life. No, not Bug's Life. It was, gosh, I can't think of the name of it, where basically the gal goes, Waskowski, I'm always watching. Yeah, that one right there, that's I kind of tell people about that. I kind of have a little meme that pops up saying I'm always watching, because then when people, it will keep, the majority of the people want to do the right thing. However, sometimes during convenience, they do things that are a little goofy. It'll keep them more along the straight and narrow. So just put out a sign that says, "I'm always watching." Yeah, that people like that. It gives them a lot of comfort. Yeah, it makes them really happy. All right, so again, accountability, access is granted to proven identities. You need to make sure that those people are who they say they are. Auditing, logging, and monitoring, you need to put it in place, even if it's just basic. Okay, something is better than nothing. And then you need to communicate to all the employees and tell them that, yes, you are watching what they are doing. And then it keeps them in track. I've already had a couple situations where people say, yeah, Sean's blocking all my access. Well, no, I'm not really blocking it. I'm just watching it. I'm just letting them know. So, and then the last one is session management. Basically, it's managing access to systems, preventing authorized access based on the session. Screensavers display random patterns and screens. That's kind of the session. You maybe have it set up where that session times out, and then those things will kick in place. You want to put some level of session management in place, because what can also happen is people, like, let's say they log into your banking and your browser is open. You added in your PIN and all of your identification, and you never closed out your browser. Well, if you don't have a session management that would then time that out after a period of time, that account could stay open in that browser, and that could be someone could get access to it. So you need to set up some sort of session management around your credentials to have them time out. And banks do a good job of this, but you need to consider that within your organization too, especially if you're looking to protect your data. So again, OWASP is a free process out there. Is the OWASP.org, I believe is what it is. And I can't think of the name of it to save my life now. It's basically application security. They're a group that puts that together, and there are a lot of cheat sheets on how to manage your data. They have one on session management specifically and what you should do around configuring that for your company. All right, so that's all I have for for topics on the CISSP study around multi-factor and SSO. That's 5.2. Now we're going to roll into some CISSP exam questions. All right, at what voltage level can static electricity cause destruction of data stored on hard drives? A, 4,000. B, 17,000. C, 40. D, 1,500. What voltage level, so it's voltage, can static electricity cause destruction of data stored on hard drives? 4,000, 17,000, 40, 1,500. And the answer is 1,500 volts of static electricity can zap. You can destroy your data stored on hard drives. So not a good thing. You want to avoid that, and you want to avoid carpet in where you have data centers. And you also want to have a little bit of moisture in there. Not a lot, a little. We talked about that last week, or on some of the exam questions that I have, that a little bit of moisture would be good. All right, you can check out that questions, or these coming up questions at Brainscape. They have flashcards out there around that. Next question. What type of physical security controls focus on facility construction and selection, site management, personnel controls, awareness training, and emergent response and procedures? What type of physical access or security controls focus on those things? A, technical. B, physical. A, administrative. C, logical. Okay, so if you're going to have questions about this question, you go, what would it be? Well, it is there. It looks, if you look at it, it looks like it's very physical in nature. However, it's an overall, because it deals with your emergency response procedures as well. So you have a technical, physical, administrative, logical. Those are the four options. And the answer is administrative, because administrative will cover your construction and selection, your site management, personnel, awareness training, and emergency response. So it's more all-encompassing. So you need to consider that. Again, that was the answer, administrative. Next question. Which of the following is typically not a culprit in causing damage to computer equipment in the event of a fire and a triggered suppression? Again, which of the following is typically not a culprit in causing damage to computer equipment in the event of a fire and a triggered suppression? A, heat. B, suppression medium. C, smoke. D, light. Okay, again, what is typically not a culprit in causing damage? Okay, what would that be? A, heat. B, suppression. C, smoke. D, light. Answer is D. Light is usually not damaging to most computer equipment, again, unless it's a laser. Tell me the movie. Okay, but it isn't. But fire, smoke, all that stuff, suppression systems will destroy your equipment. So something to consider there. All right, I hope you guys enjoyed this. We will have more of my questions. You can find those at SeanGerber.com. But I hope you have a blessed and wonderful week. We'll catch you on the flip side. See ya. Thanks so much for joining me today on my podcast. Head over to SeanGerber.com and look at all the free content that I have available for you. There is a CISSP mini course, free CISSP exam questions, podcast, and so much more. It's all available to my email subscribers, so sign up. If you want my personalized CISSP training, purchase my training courses and I'll be there to help you with your CISSP needs so you can pass the test the first time. Thanks so much for listening. We'll catch you on the flip side. See ya.